The slap that echoed. The courtroom was packed with a palpable tension as Judge Marcus Williams presided over a controversial civil rights case. His dark robes and dignified stature commanded respect, yet the proceedings had brought more hostility than reverence. The defendant, Officer Richard Thompson, was accused of excessive force, a case that had stirred a maelstrom of public opinion. As Marcus delivered his verdict, guilty, a ripple of murmurs spread through the gallery. Rows of uniformed officers shifted uncomfortably, their faces etched with disbelief and defiance. To Marcus's right, the victim's family clung to each other, tears streaming as they finally felt vindication. Marcus's gavel struck the desk sharply. Order. This court will not tolerate disruptions. Justice is impartial and must remain so. Several officers stood and exited the courtroom in silent protest, their boots clacking on the polished floors. The message was clear. They viewed the verdict as a betrayal. Marcus held his ground, though the weight of their judgment lingered heavily. That evening, Marcus pulled into his driveway, the events of the day etched into his mind. His modest suburban home, usually a sanctuary, felt smaller under the burden he carried. Inside, his 17-year-old son, Jaden, was hunched over homework at the kitchen table. "Hey, Dad," Jaden said, looking up with worry. "I saw the news. Are you okay?" Marcus hung his coat, loosening his tie as he approached. "Sometimes, son, doing what's right isn't easy, but that's exactly why we have to do it." Jaden hesitated, lowering his voice. "Some kids at school, their parents are cops. They're not happy with you." Marcus placed a reassuring hand on Jaden's shoulder. "Kindness and integrity don't mean weakness, Jaden. Remember that. Doing what's right often makes waves, but the ripples can change the current." Meanwhile, across town at the 7th Precinct, Officer Jack Daniels slammed his locker shut, the metallic clang echoing through the break room. The air was thick with frustration as officers debated the day's verdict. Jack's voice rose above the others, his frustration barely contained. "It's a witch hunt," he spat. "Thompson's been a cop for 20 years, and now one decision ruins his life. That judge has no idea what it's like out there." "Daniels, my office," barked Captain Morrison, cutting through the growing noise. Jack stormed into the office, his face a mask of barely suppressed rage. Captain Morrison leaned against his desk, arms crossed. "You need to cool it, Jack. This kind of talk isn't helping." "Helping," Jack growled. "We're under attack. The media, these activist judges, they're all out to destroy us." Morrison's voice hardened. "One more outburst like this, and I'll put you on desk duty. Do I make myself clear?" Jack gritted his teeth. "Yes, sir." As Jack left, his fists clenched at his sides. He strode through the precinct with a storm in his eyes, his colleagues giving him a wide berth. Later that night, the lives of Marcus and Jack collided in an unexpected confrontation. Marcus had stopped at May's Diner, a local favorite known for its home-style cooking. It was a rare moment of peace after a tumultuous day. Sally, the elderly waitress, set a steaming cup of coffee in front of him. "How's Jaden doing, Judge Williams?" Sally asked with a warm smile. "He's adjusting," Marcus replied, his voice steady but weary. The bell above the diner door jingled, and Jack Daniels walked in, still wearing his uniform. He ignored Marcus and took a seat at the counter, his body tense with unspoken anger. Minutes later, the atmosphere in the diner changed dramatically when Jack shoved a young black man through the door. The man, Ryan Jefferson, stumbled but kept his composure, his hands raised in compliance. "I told you, officer," Ryan said firmly. "I was just waiting for my food. Here's the receipt." Jack tightened his grip on Ryan's arm, his face red with anger. "Then why did you try to leave when I approached you?" "I didn't. I moved aside for another customer," Ryan protested, wincing. Marcus observed the scene, his judicial instincts kicking in. Around the diner, patrons pulled out their phones, recording the escalating tension. Sally interjected nervously. "Officer," Ryan's a regular. He's telling the truth. Jack ignored her, forcing Ryan against the counter. ID. Now. Marcus stood, his voice calm but firm. Officer, if I may. Stay out of this. Jack barked, not even sparing Marcus a glance. I believe the young man has explained himself, Marcus continued. The staff has corroborated his story. There seems to be no need for this aggression. Jack turned to Marcus, fury blazing in his eyes. You don't get to tell me how to do my job. The crack of Jack's palm against Marcus's cheek silenced the diner. Gasps filled the room, followed by the rapid clicks of phone cameras. Marcus staggered but remained composed, touching his reddening cheek with dignity. Jack froze, the weight of what he had just done dawning on him. The room felt like it had stopped breathing. Ryan took the opportunity to step back, moving towards Sally for safety. Marcus adjusted his tie, his voice steady despite the tension. Officer Daniels, we'll address this incident through the proper channels. Jack stumbled out of the diner, his face pale. He could feel the eyes of the patrons boring into him, their silent judgment louder than any words. Back home, Marcus sat in his living room, replaying the incident in his mind. Camille, his wife, placed a hand on his shoulder as the video aired on the evening news. The police chief called again, Camille said softly. They want to know if you'll press charges. Marcus sighed, leaning back in his chair. Pressing charges would deepen the divide between law enforcement and the judiciary, but letting it go would send the wrong message. Camille studied her husband, her eyes filled with concern. And what would you tell Jaden to do? Marcus looked at her, then at their family photo on the mantel. I tell him to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. As the night deepened, Marcus knew that his decision would ripple far beyond himself, touching the lives of his family, his community, and even Jack Daniels, whose world was about to unravel in ways neither man could imagine. The battle lines are drawn. The viral video of Officer Jack Daniels slapping Judge Marcus Williams ignited a firestorm that neither man could escape. News outlets played the footage on an endless loop, while social media exploded with outrage, debates, and commentary. The nation had found its latest flashpoint in the ongoing conversation about race, authority, and justice. For Marcus, the aftermath was immediate and overwhelming. His typically quiet suburban street was now lined with news vans and reporters vying for his attention. Camille closed the curtains, her hand trembling. Marcus, this is out of control, she said, glancing at the crowd outside. I can't even go to the store without someone recognizing me. They're asking questions about Jaden too. Marcus set down his coffee, his face etched with exhaustion. I know, Camille, but this isn't just about us. If I back down, it sends the message that intimidation and violence can silence justice. Camille's voice softened, but at what cost? Your safety. Jaden's. Ours. Jaden appeared in the doorway, his expression firm. Mom, Dad's right. This isn't just about him. It's about what's fair. People at school are talking about how brave he is. If he gives up now, what does that teach everyone watching? Marcus smiled faintly at his son's determination. Thank you, Jaden. But this fight isn't without risks. We need to be prepared. Across town, Jack Daniels faced a different kind of storm. He sat in the precinct's conference room, his badge and gun already surrendered. Internal affairs had taken over, and the police union was lukewarm in its defense of him. Detective Clara Monroe, a no-nonsense investigator with a reputation for cutting through lies, placed a thick file on the table. Officer Daniels, we need to understand what happened in that diner. Jack avoided her gaze, his hands fidgeting on the table. It was a stressful situation. The judge was interfering with my duties. Clara leaned forward, her sharp eyes piercing. Interfering. Or trying to de-escalate. The video shows a different story, and you struck a sitting judge in front of witnesses. You understand the gravity of that, don't you? Jack's jaw tightened. I lost control, okay? I didn't mean for it to go that far. Clara's tone softened slightly. This isn't just about the slap, Jack. It's about what led up to it. The tension, the anger. This department is under scrutiny, and you just became the face of it. When Jack returned home, the atmosphere was icy. Emily, his wife, was waiting for him in the living room, her arms crossed. "I can't do this anymore, Jack," she said, her voice trembling. "The kids' school called. They're being harassed because of what you did. Do you even realize how this affects us?" Jack sank into the couch, his head in his hands. "Emily, I didn't mean for this to happen. It just spiraled." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "You've changed, Jack. You're angry all the time. Where's the man I married? The one who cared about doing the right thing?" Jack looked up, desperation in his eyes. "I'm still that man. I feel like the whole world is against us, against me. I don't know how to fix this." "Start by taking responsibility," Emily said, her voice firm, "and figure out who you are, because I don't recognize you anymore." At the Williams residence, Marcus was trying to do the opposite, protect his family while staying true to his principles. He spent hours on calls with city officials, the police chief, and legal advisors. Each conversation seemed to add another layer of complexity. Later that evening, Marcus sat with Camille in their study. The anonymous threats they had received over the past few days were laid out on the desk. The latest one was particularly chilling. "Drop the charges, or your family will pay the price." Camille gripped Marcus's hand tightly. "Marcus, this is serious. They're not just angry. They're dangerous." "I know," Marcus replied, his voice steady but heavy. "But if we back down, we let fear win. What kind of example does that set for Jaden? For anyone watching?" Meanwhile, Jaden was grappling with his own challenges. At school, he was both admired and ostracized. Some students praised his father's courage, while others, particularly those with ties to law enforcement families, avoided him or made snide comments. During lunch, Jaden was approached by Maggie Daniels, Jack's daughter. She was quiet and reserved, but her auburn hair and tired eyes betrayed the stress she was under. "Hey," she said hesitantly, sitting across from him. I wanted to say I'm sorry about everything. My dad, he's not usually like this." Jaden looked at her, surprised. "Thanks. I know this must be hard for you too." Maggie nodded, her gaze dropping to the table. "It is. He's been so angry lately, like he's carrying the weight of the world. I just wish things could go back to normal." Jaden offered a small smile. "Me too. Maybe they can. Maybe this doesn't have to define everything." Their conversation was interrupted by a group of students whispering nearby, their glances sharp and judgmental. Both Jaden and Maggie felt the weight of their divided worlds. But in that moment, they found an unexpected connection. Back at the precinct, Jack Daniels received a visit from Paul Simmons, an old partner and one of the few colleagues still speaking to him. "Jack," Paul said, his voice low, "you've got to be careful. People are watching you. And I don't just mean internal affairs." Jack frowned. "What are you talking about?" Paul leaned in, his expression serious. "There are some folks who don't like how things are playing out. They think you're going to crack under pressure, maybe start talking about things that should stay buried." Jack's stomach turned. "I didn't ask for any of this." "Doesn't matter," Paul said. "Just remember who your friends are, and who they aren't." Jack watched as Paul left, his words lingering like a dark cloud. He felt trapped, surrounded by forces pulling him in different directions. That night, Marcus found himself unable to sleep. He sat in his study, poring over the case files and security footage from the diner. Detective Clara Monroe had assured him that the investigation was moving forward, but the threats against his family weighed heavily on his mind. Suddenly, Jaden appeared in the doorway. "Dad?" Marcus looked up, his expression softening. "What is it, son?" Jaden stepped inside, his face serious. "I just wanted to say, I'm proud of you, for standing up for what's right." Marcus smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "Thank you, Jaden. That means more to me than you know." As the night deepened, both the Williams and Daniels families wrestled with their own battles. Marcus prepared for the fight ahead, determined to uphold justice despite the risks. Jack, meanwhile, grappled with the consequences of his actions, his world crumbling as he struggled to find a way out. The lines had been drawn, but the question remained, who would emerge stronger, and at what cost? Truths emerge, bridges burn. The next morning, the Williams residence buzzed with activity. Reporters camped outside the house, their cameras pointed at every window. Marcus stood by the living room window, watching the scene unfold with an unreadable expression. "How long are they going to stay out there?" Jaden asked, peeking through the curtains. "As long as this story remains news," Marcus replied, sipping his coffee. His voice was calm, but the fatigue in his eyes betrayed him. Camille joined them, holding a tray of breakfast. "You need to eat, Marcus. Skipping meals won't make this easier." "I know, Camille," Marcus said, sitting down, "but every step forward feels like 2 steps back. I'm worried about Jaden, about you, and now there's this meeting with the mayor." Jaden glanced at his father. "What does she want?" "She wants me to drop the charges," Marcus said bluntly. "She thinks it'll calm things down." Jaden's face hardened. "You're not going to, are you?" "No," Marcus said firmly. "Justice isn't about convenience." Across town, Jack Daniels woke up to a house that felt emptier than ever. Emily and Maggie were still staying with her sister, and the silence in the home gnawed at him. He sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee as the phone rang. "Daniels," he answered, his voice gruff. "Jack, it's Paul," the voice on the other end said. "You've got a problem." Jack frowned. "What now?" "You're being thrown under the bus," Paul said bluntly. "The union's pulling back their support. They think you're too toxic to defend." Jack felt the air leave his lungs. "What? I've given 20 years to this job." "Doesn't matter," Paul said. "They're in damage control mode. You're expendable." Jack slammed the phone down, his hands shaking. He had always believed in the brotherhood of the badge, but now it felt like that bond had been severed. Meanwhile, at Lincoln High School, Jaden and Maggie continued to navigate the fallout of their father's confrontation. They were paired together in a biology class project, and their partnership had drawn attention from classmates. During lunch, Maggie approached Jaden, her expression hesitant. "Hey, can we talk?" "Sure," Jaden said, moving to an empty table. Maggie sat across from him, her eyes filled with worry. "My dad, he's not doing well. He's angry all the time, and he won't talk to anyone. I don't know what to do." Jaden hesitated. "I don't know what to say, Maggie. My dad's dealing with a lot too. But he always says that doing what's right is never easy." Maggie nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "I wish my dad thought like that. He used to be different. Now he's just lost." Jaden reached across the table, placing a hand over hers. Maybe he just needs someone to remind him of who he used to be. Their quiet moment was interrupted by a group of students whispering nearby, their voices carrying across the cafeteria. "Can you believe them? His dad's the judge, and her dad's the cop. It's like some bad drama." Jaden turned toward them, his jaw tightening. "You got something to say?" The students quickly looked away, muttering under their breath. "Ignore them," Maggie said, pulling her hand back. "They don't understand." Back at the precinct, Detective Clara Monroe reviewed the latest findings in the case against Jack Daniels. She had spent weeks piecing together not just the events at the diner, but the systemic issues that had allowed such behavior to fester. Judge Williams was attacked in a parking garage, she told her partner, Detective Rodriguez. The security footage shows someone with police training. This wasn't random. Rodriguez frowned. "You think Daniels had something to do with it?" Clara shook her head. "I don't think so. He's too much of a hothead to plan something this precise. But someone's trying to send a message, and Daniels is caught in the middle. At the Williams residence, Marcus prepared for his meeting with Mayor Patricia Chen. Camille watched him tie his tie, her worry evident. "Marcus, are you sure about this?" she asked. "The mayor isn't on your side." "I know," Marcus said, adjusting his jacket. "But I need her to understand that this isn't just about one case. It's about systemic change." Camille sighed. "Just be careful. They'll use anything they can against you." Marcus kissed her cheek. "I always am." The meeting with the mayor took place in a sleek, modern office overlooking the city. Patricia Chen greeted Marcus with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Judge Williams," she said, gesturing for him to sit. "Thank you for coming." "Madam Mayor," Marcus said, taking a seat. "I understand you wanted to discuss the case." Patricia nodded, folding her hands on the desk. "The city is in turmoil, Marcus. The protests, the media, it's all escalating. Dropping the charges against Officer Daniels could help calm things down." Marcus leaned forward, his voice steady. "And what message does that send? That violence and intimidation can silence justice." "Marcus," Patricia said, her tone measured, "I'm asking you to think about the bigger picture. This isn't just about you or Daniels. It's about the city." "No, Madam Mayor," Marcus replied. "It's about accountability. If we back down now, we undermine everything the justice system stands for." Patricia's expression hardened. "Then I hope you're prepared for the consequences." Later that evening, Marcus returned home to find Jaden and Camille waiting for him in the living room. Jaden was holding a newspaper with the headline, "Tensions escalate as Judge Williams refuses to back down." "Is this true, Dad?" Jaden asked. Marcus nodded. "Yes, it is. I'm not dropping the charges." Jaden smiled, a glimmer of pride in his eyes. "Good. People need to see that justice matters." Camille, however, looked more concerned. "Marcus, the threats are getting worse. What if something happens to you?" Marcus sat beside her, taking her hands in his. "I won't let fear dictate my actions, Camille. This fight is bigger than us." As the family sat together, the weight of their situation pressed down on them. But in their unity they found strength, a strength they would need in the days to come, as the battle for justice continued to unfold. Meanwhile, Jack Daniels sat alone in his living room, nursing a drink. The weight of his actions and their consequences bore down on him, but a small voice inside whispered something he hadn't allowed himself to consider. "Maybe I was wrong." As the night stretched on, both men, Marcus and Jack, faced their own truths. The lines between right and wrong blurred as the stakes grew higher, and the choices they made in the days ahead would shape not only their own futures but the future of their community. Cracks in the foundation. The weeks following the diner incident brought escalating tensions. Protests had erupted across the city, with two distinct groups shouting across a growing chasm. On one side stood those demanding justice and accountability, many waving signs bearing Judge Marcus Williams' name. On the other, angry voices declared unwavering support for Officer Jack Daniels, painting him as a scapegoat in a politically charged environment. For Marcus, every day brought new challenges. The threats had grown more personal, now targeting not just him, but also Camille and Jaden. Private security patrolled their home day and night, and Marcus had started taking a different route to the courthouse every morning. In the courthouse parking garage, Marcus stepped out of his car, his movements cautious. The events of the attack in the same space still haunted him. A guard accompanied him to the elevator, where Detective Clara Monroe was waiting. "Judge Williams," Clara greeted, her voice professional but tinged with concern. "I wanted to update you personally." Marcus nodded. "What's the latest?" Clara handed him a file. "We've identified a suspect in your attack. Former Officer Paul Simmons. He's been connected to several incidents of intimidation against whistleblowers and public officials." Marcus flipped through the file, his brow furrowing. Simmons was Jack Daniels' former partner, wasn't he? "Yes," Clara confirmed. but there's no evidence that Daniels was involved in the attack. Simmons appears to be acting independently, but his motives align with a broader culture of resistance within certain precincts. Marcus closed the file, his expression heavy. "Thank you, Detective. Please keep me informed." As Marcus entered the courthouse, he couldn't shake the feeling that the battle he was fighting was much larger than just his case against Jack Daniels. It was a battle against a deeply entrenched system resistant to change. Across town, Jack Daniels sat in his living room, surrounded by a growing pile of unopened letters and bills. His suspension had left him in financial limbo, and the police union's decision to withdraw support only added to his mounting despair. Emily and Maggie were still staying with her sister, and the silence in the house was deafening. Jack's phone buzzed on the coffee table, and for a moment he considered ignoring it. But when he saw the name, he answered. "Paul," Jack said, his voice weary. "What do you want?" "You need to get out ahead of this," Paul said, his tone urgent. "They're coming after all of us, Jack. First, they take down the union, then the rest of us fall in line." Jack frowned. "What are you talking about?" "The system is turning on its own," Paul continued. "You think they'll stop with you? They'll keep digging until we're all ruined. We have to stand together." Jack's stomach churned. "Paul, I didn't ask for any of this. And if you had anything to do with what happened to Judge Williams—" "You don't get it, do you?" Paul snapped. "This isn't about Williams. It's about protecting ourselves. If you think groveling to him is going to save you, you're more naive than I thought." Jack ended the call, his hand trembling. He stared at the phone, Paul's words echoing in his mind. For the first time, Jack began to question the loyalty of the very system he had spent decades defending. At Lincoln High School, Jaden and Maggie worked on their biology project in the library. Despite the growing tension between their families, the two had become closer, finding solace in their shared struggles. "Jaden," Maggie said hesitantly, glancing up from her notes, "do you ever think about what happens after this, after everything with our dads?" Jaden paused, his pencil hovering over his notebook. "I don't know. I hope things get better. But it feels like everything's so broken." Maggie nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking about my dad a lot. About how he used to be. He wasn't always like this. He used to believe in doing the right thing." Jaden met her gaze. "People change. Sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. But I think they can find their way back if they really want to." Maggie smiled faintly. "I hope you're right." Later that evening, Marcus and Camille sat in their living room, reviewing the latest security measures. Jaden joined them, carrying his laptop. "Dad," Jaden began, "I think we should use this attention to talk about the bigger issues. Everyone's watching, right? Maybe we can shift the conversation." Marcus looked at his son, impressed by his initiative. "What do you have in mind?" Jaden opened a presentation he had been working on. "We could host a community forum. Invite people to talk about their experiences with the justice system. Show that this isn't just about one incident, but about making things better for everyone." Camille smiled, her eyes filled with pride. "That's a wonderful idea, Jaden." Marcus nodded. "It's ambitious, but it could work. Let's make it happen." Meanwhile, Jack Daniels sat in a downtown bar, nursing a whiskey. The room was dimly lit, and the air was heavy with the scent of stale beer and regret. Jack's thoughts were a chaotic swirl of anger, shame, and confusion. "Daniels," a voice called, pulling him from his reverie. Jack turned to see Paul Simmons approaching, his expression serious. "What are you doing here?" Jack asked, his voice sharp. "We need to talk," Paul said, sitting across from him. "You're not handling this right." Jack clenched his jaw. "I don't need advice from you, Paul." Paul leaned forward, his voice low. "You need to decide where your loyalty lies, with them or with us." Jack's eyes narrowed. "There is no us, Paul. You crossed a line, and now you're dragging me down with you." Paul smirked. "You think you're better than me. You've been playing the game just like the rest of us. Don't pretend you're innocent." Jack slammed his glass on the table, the sound echoing in the quiet bar. "Get out, Paul." Paul stood, his smirk fading. "Don't say I didn't warn you." As Paul left, Jack felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time, he saw Paul for what he truly was, a man consumed by fear and desperation, willing to destroy anyone in his path. The following week, the community forum organized by Marcus and Jaden took place at a local community center. The room was filled with people from all walks of life, their faces reflecting a mix of hope, anger, and curiosity. Marcus stood at the podium, his voice steady but passionate. "This isn't just about one case or one person. It's about the systems we've built and the ways we can make them better. Justice isn't just a word. It's a promise we must all uphold." Jaden watched from the front row, his heart swelling with pride. For the first time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of hope. In the back of the room, Maggie sat with Emily, both listening intently. Maggie glanced at Jaden, their eyes meeting briefly. In that moment, she felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time: possibility. As the forum ended, Marcus shook hands with attendees, his resolve stronger than ever. But he knew the road ahead would not be easy. The fight for justice was far from over, and the cracks in the foundation were only beginning to show. Breaking the chains. The community forum sparked something that neither Marcus nor his detractors had anticipated: a dialogue. Video clips from the event circulated widely online, showing Marcus speaking passionately about the justice system's need for reform. Stories shared by attendees painted a picture of systemic issues that extended beyond Jack Daniels and Marcus Williams. The world was watching, and the stakes were higher than ever. At the Williams residence, Marcus and Camille sat together at the dining table, sorting through dozens of letters and emails from people who had been moved by the forum. Camille held up one letter. This woman wrote about how her son was unfairly targeted because of his race. She says your verdict gave her hope. Marcus nodded solemnly. It's humbling. But for every message of support, there's another threat or accusation. Change is never easy. Jaden entered the room, holding his phone. "Dad, you're trending again. The hashtags #JusticeForAll and #WilliamsForReform are everywhere." Marcus chuckled softly. "Let's hope that momentum turns into something real." Jaden hesitated before speaking again. "I think we should reach out to Officer Daniels. Maybe it's time for a conversation." Camille's eyes widened. "Are you serious, Jaden? After everything that's happened?" "Think about it," Jaden urged. "Dad's all about justice and reconciliation, right? What if talking to Daniels could break the cycle of anger and retaliation?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, considering his son's words. "You might be onto something, Jaden, but it would take a lot of courage on his part. And ours." Across town, Jack Daniels sat on the edge of his bed, staring at a photo of himself and Maggie taken years ago at a father-daughter fishing trip. The man in the photo looked happy, confident, and sure of his place in the world. The man holding the photo felt like a shadow of that person. Maggie entered the room hesitantly, her presence breaking his trance. "Dad." Jack looked up, his face etched with exhaustion. "Hey, sweetheart." Maggie sat beside him, her voice soft. "I went to the community forum." Jack's brows furrowed. "You what?" "I listened to Judge Williams," Maggie continued, meeting his gaze. "He wasn't just talking about you. He was talking about everyone. About fixing what's broken." Jack sighed, setting the photo aside. "Maggie, you don't understand what it's like out there. People like him." "No, Dad," Maggie interrupted. "You don't understand. You've been so angry that you can't see what's really happening. He's not your enemy. You're your own enemy." Her words hit like a punch to the gut. Jack looked away, unable to face the truth in her eyes. Maggie stood, her voice trembling. "I missed the dad who taught me how to stand up for what's right. I don't know who you are anymore." As she left the room, Jack felt the weight of her words pressing down on him. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to reflect, not on the system, not on the backlash, but on himself. Later that evening, Marcus received an unexpected call. When he saw the name on the caller ID, he hesitated before answering. Judge Williams. Jack's voice came through, strained but steady. "I'd like to meet." Marcus's grip tightened on the phone. "Are you sure about that, Officer Daniels?" "I need to do this," Jack said, his tone resolute. "For my daughter, for myself. I'll come to your office tomorrow." Marcus agreed, though he knew the conversation ahead would not be easy. The following day, Jack arrived at Marcus's courthouse office, his civilian clothes hanging loosely on his frame. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. Marcus greeted him with a nod, gesturing for him to sit. The room was quiet, the tension palpable. Jack broke the silence first. "I'm not here to justify what I did," he began, "because I can't. But I need you to know, I wasn't always this person." Marcus studied him, his expression unreadable. "Then why did you let yourself become this person?" Jack ran a hand through his hair, his voice cracking. "I don't know. Somewhere along the way, I got lost. The job, the pressure, the feeling that everyone was against us, it all built up. But that's not an excuse." "It's not," Marcus said firmly. "But acknowledging it is the first step." Jack looked up, meeting Marcus's gaze. "I want to make things right. I don't know how, but I want to try." Marcus leaned forward, his voice calm but powerful. "Change starts with accountability. If you're serious about making things right, you need to take responsibility for your actions. Not just with me, but with your family, your community, and yourself." Jack nodded slowly. "I'm ready to face the consequences, whatever they are." The meeting between Marcus and Jack was not without its ripple effects. News of their conversation spread quickly, igniting further debate. Some praised Marcus for his willingness to engage, while others accused him of being too lenient. For Jack, the conversation marked the beginning of a long road to redemption. He began attending therapy sessions to confront his anger and biases. He also started volunteering at community programs aimed at bridging the divide between law enforcement and marginalized communities. At the same time, Marcus continued to face resistance. The mayor's office pushed back against his efforts for reform, and the threats against him and his family persisted. But Marcus refused to back down, drawing strength from his family and the community members who supported him. At Lincoln High School, Jaden and Maggie's friendship grew stronger despite the challenges they faced. One afternoon, as they worked on their biology project, Maggie shared a surprising revelation. "My dad went to see your dad," she said, her voice tentative. Jaden looked up, surprised. "Seriously?" Maggie nodded. "He told me he wants to change. I don't know if he can, but it's a start." Jaden smiled faintly. "That's all anyone can ask for, a start." The fight for justice continued, with Marcus and Jack navigating their respective journeys. For Marcus, it was about pushing forward despite the obstacles. For Jack, it was about rebuilding from the ground up. Their paths were far from easy, but in their own ways, they both began to understand that true change required more than just words. It required action, vulnerability, and the courage to face the truth. Breaking the chains. As Jack left Marcus's office, he felt the air around him shift. The weight of his confession had lightened his chest, but the path forward loomed with uncertainty. The media frenzy had painted him as a villain, and his family remained distant. For the first time in years, he was forced to confront not just the man he had become, but the consequences of his actions. Meanwhile, Marcus returned home to a scene of quiet tension. Camille was seated at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea, while Jaden leaned against the counter. "How did it go?" Camille asked cautiously. Marcus placed his briefcase on the table and sank into a chair. "He's remorseful. I believe he wants to change." Jaden tilted his head, curiosity piqued. Do you think he can, or is it too late? Marcus exhaled deeply. That's up to him. A single conversation doesn't erase the past, but it can plant a seed. The question is whether he'll nurture it. Camille looked skeptical. You're kinder than I would be, Marcus. He hurt you, endangered our family, and fueled a storm that hasn't settled. Forgiveness is one thing, but trust, that's another. Forgiveness doesn't require trust. Marcus replied gently. It requires courage. If we're truly trying to lead by example, we have to show people a way forward. Across town, Jack walked into the community center where a restorative justice meeting was being held. The room was sparse but warm, with chairs arranged in a circle. A facilitator welcomed him, guiding him to a seat. Around him sat individuals from various walks of life: officers, community activists, and citizens affected by systemic injustices. As introductions were made, Jack listened intently. Each story added a layer of understanding he hadn't grasped before. When it was his turn to speak, he felt his throat tighten. "My name is Jack Daniels," he began, his voice low. "I've been a cop for over 20 years, and in that time, I've made mistakes. Big ones. I let my anger and fear dictate my actions. I lost sight of what it meant to protect and serve. And for that, I'm sorry." The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling over everyone. A young man across from Jack, whose brother had been a victim of police brutality, spoke up. "Sorry doesn't change what happened," the man said, his tone sharp but not unkind. "But it's a start. What matters is what you do next." Jack nodded, the words hitting him like a hammer. "I know. That's why I'm here. I don't want to be part of the problem anymore." At Lincoln High School, Jaden and Maggie's friendship continued to grow despite the challenges surrounding them. Their biology project had earned top marks, but their bond extended far beyond the classroom. One afternoon, as they walked home together, Maggie turned to Jaden. "I think my dad's really trying to change. He started going to these community meetings, and he's been talking to me more about what's been going on." Jaden smiled. "That's good. It's not easy to admit when you're wrong." Maggie nodded. "What about your dad? How's he holding up?" Jaden's expression grew serious. "He's strong, but this whole thing has been hard on him and us. The threats, the pressure, it's a lot. But he's not giving up. And neither are we." Maggie hesitated before speaking again. "I hope one day our dads can actually work together. Like, really work together." Jaden laughed softly. "That would be something, wouldn't it?" As weeks turned into months, the ripple effects of Marcus and Jack's decisions began to manifest. Marcus continued his push for reform, using his platform to advocate for systemic change. He collaborated with community leaders, law enforcement officials, and activists to create programs aimed at bridging the divide. Jack, on the other hand, embarked on a journey of accountability. He met with individuals and families affected by police misconduct, listening to their stories and offering his apologies. The process was humbling, often painful, but it was also transformative. One evening, Jack found himself standing outside Emily's house. He had been there countless times before, but tonight felt different. He rang the doorbell, his heart pounding. Emily opened the door, her expression wary. "Jack." "Emily," Jack began, his voice trembling. "I know I've hurt you. I know I've let you down. But I'm trying to make things right. For you, for Maggie, for myself." Emily studied him for a long moment before stepping aside. "Come in." At the Williams residence, Marcus sat in his study, reviewing the latest draft of a city-wide reform proposal. Jaden entered, holding his laptop. "Dad," Jaden said, his voice hesitant. "I've been working on something. I think it might help." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" Jaden handed him the laptop, the screen displaying a video project. It featured clips from the community forum, testimonials from citizens, and a powerful narration about the importance of justice and accountability. "I thought we could share it online." Jaden explained. "Let people see what we're trying to do." Marcus smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "This is incredible, Jaden. Let's do it." As the video circulated online, it gained traction, sparking conversations far beyond their city. People from all over the country began sharing their own stories, creating a groundswell of support for the reforms Marcus was championing. In the meantime, Jack attended another restorative justice meeting, this time as a speaker. He shared his journey with the group, speaking candidly about his mistakes and the steps he was taking to rebuild. "Change isn't easy," Jack said, his voice steady. "But it's necessary. And it starts with each of us, owning up to what we've done and committing to do better." As he spoke, Marcus entered the room quietly, standing at the back. Jack noticed him, their eyes meeting briefly. In that moment, there was no animosity, only mutual respect. The road ahead was still long, but for the first time, it felt like they were walking it together. The road to redemption. The weeks that followed felt like a turning point, though neither Marcus Williams nor Jack Daniels believed the storm had passed entirely. The city remained a powder keg of tension, but cracks of light began to filter through the darkness. The hearing. In the packed courtroom, Jack Daniels stood before a judge, not Marcus, but another respected official who had been assigned to oversee the assault case. The room buzzed with anticipation. Reporters lined the back, their cameras clicking at every movement. Emily and Maggie sat in the front row, their faces a mixture of apprehension and quiet hope. As Jack rose to speak, he glanced toward Marcus, seated among the observers. Their eyes met briefly, and Marcus offered the faintest of nods, a gesture of encouragement. "Your Honor," Jack began, his voice steady but tinged with humility, "I stand here today not to make excuses, but to take responsibility for my actions. What I did was wrong, and it violated the trust placed in me as a police officer. For that, I am deeply sorry, not just to Judge Williams, but to the community I swore to serve and protect." A murmur rippled through the room. Jack's lawyer had advised against making such a direct statement, but Jack had insisted. He needed to say the words. The judge regarded him carefully. "Officer Daniels, your acknowledgement is a step forward, but actions speak louder than words. How do you intend to make amends?" Jack swallowed hard, gripping the podium. "By continuing the work I've started. I've been attending restorative justice meetings, volunteering with community programs, and having difficult conversations with people I've wronged. I'm committed to change, not just for myself, but to help repair the damage I've contributed to." The judge nodded, her expression softening. "Your honesty is noted, Officer Daniels. The court will take your statement and actions into consideration during sentencing." As Jack returned to his seat, Emily reached out and squeezed his hand. For the first time in months, he felt the faint flicker of hope, a growing alliance. Later that evening, Marcus and Jack met at a neutral location, a community center that had become a hub for dialogue and reform. It was their second meeting, but this time it felt less adversarial and more collaborative. "I saw your statement," Marcus said, extending a hand. It took courage. Jack shook his hand, his grip firm. "I've learned a lot over the past few months. It's humbling to realize how blind I was to my own flaws." "We all have blind spots," Marcus replied. "The question is whether we're willing to confront them and do better." The two men sat down at a table surrounded by community leaders, activists, and even a few officers willing to engage in the hard conversations. The goal was clear: to create actionable steps toward bridging the divide between law enforcement and the communities they served. The discussions were intense, often emotional, but progress was made. Ideas were floated for mandatory de-escalation training, civilian oversight committees, and programs to address systemic biases within the department. For Marcus, it was a continuation of the work he'd dedicated his life to. For Jack, it was a chance to prove that he could be part of the solution. Mending fences. At home, Jack's relationship with Emily and Maggie began to heal. Emily had agreed to move back in, though she made it clear that trust would take time to rebuild. Maggie, on the other hand, was quicker to forgive. One evening, as Jack helped Maggie with a school project, she looked up at him and said, "I'm proud of you, Dad." Jack froze, his heart swelling. "You are." Maggie nodded. "You've changed. You're listening now, and you're trying. That's all I ever wanted." Jack pulled her into a hug, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll keep trying, Maggie. I promise." The threat that lingered. While progress was being made, not everyone welcomed the change. Paul Simmons, Jack's former partner, had disappeared after being implicated in the attack on Marcus. But his influence lingered in the shadows, and rumors circulated about factions within the police force resisting reform. One evening, as Marcus drove home from the courthouse, he noticed a car following him. His grip on the steering wheel tightened as he turned onto a quieter street, testing whether the car would follow. It did. Marcus's phone buzzed, and he answered quickly. "Detective Monroe, I think I'm being followed." "Where are you?" Clara's voice was sharp and alert. Marcus gave her his location, and she assured him that units were on their way. Moments later, the car behind him sped up, swerving dangerously close to his bumper before peeling off into the night. When Marcus arrived home, shaken but unharmed, Camille was waiting for him. "You need to be careful, Marcus," she said, her voice trembling. "This fight is bigger than we realized." "I know," Marcus said, pulling her into an embrace. "But we can't let fear stop us." A symbolic gesture. The culmination of their efforts came in the form of a public event, a joint statement delivered by Marcus and Jack in front of City Hall. The crowd was a mix of supporters and skeptics, but the moment felt significant. Marcus stepped up to the microphone first. "Today isn't about me or Officer Daniels. It's about acknowledging the flaws in our systems and committing to doing better. Change isn't easy, and it doesn't happen overnight. But it starts with accountability, with dialogue, and with action." Jack followed, his voice steady despite the nerves coursing through him. "For years, I saw the world through a narrow lens. I thought being a good cop meant sticking to the rules and protecting my own. But I've learned that true service requires more than that. It requires humility, compassion, and a willingness to listen. I'm here today to say that I'm committed to those principles moving forward." The crowd erupted in applause, though not everyone clapped. Change, they both knew, would take time. The ripple effect. Months later, the reforms spearheaded by Marcus and supported by Jack began to show results. Incidents of misconduct decreased, and trust between law enforcement and the community started to rebuild. For Jack, life was far from perfect, but it was heading in the right direction. He continued his volunteer work and became an advocate for restorative justice, speaking at events and mentoring younger officers. For Marcus, the fight was ongoing, but he no longer felt like he was standing alone. The partnerships he had forged with community leaders and reformed officers like Jack gave him hope that the system could, indeed, change. A new chapter. On a quiet evening, Marcus, Camille, and Jaden sat on their back porch, watching the sunset. The chaos of the past year felt distant, replaced by a sense of hard-won peace. "Dad," Jaden said, breaking the silence, "do you think things will ever really change?" Marcus looked at his son, his eyes filled with both wariness and hope. "Change is slow, Jaden. It's hard, and it's messy. But if enough people are willing to stand up and fight for what's right, I believe it can happen." In another part of the city, Jack sat with Emily and Maggie, laughing over dinner. For the first time in years, his home felt like a sanctuary again. The road to redemption was long and winding, but for both men, it was a journey worth taking. Together, they had proven that even in the face of deep divisions, understanding and reconciliation were possible. And in their efforts, they had planted seeds of hope for a better, more just future. The ripple of change. The quiet that followed the public event was deceptive. Beneath the surface, the work of healing a divided community and reforming broken systems continued in earnest. For Marcus Williams, the fight was far from over. For Jack Daniels, the path to redemption had only just begun. A call to action. 2 weeks after their joint statement at City Hall, Marcus received a call from Detective Clara Monroe. The investigation into Paul Simmons had uncovered a network of officers who shared his extreme views. These individuals had conspired to undermine the reforms Marcus was championing. "Judge Williams, I need you to see this for yourself," Clara said over the phone. At the precinct, Clara laid out evidence of secret meetings, threatening communications, and attempts to intimidate key figures in the community. Among the documents was a detailed plan to sabotage a police-community partnership program that Marcus and Jack had supported. "This isn't just resistance," Clara explained. "This is organized opposition. They want to send a message that reform will be met with force." Marcus's face tightened. "And how do we respond?" Clara met his gaze. "We don't back down. We let them know we see them, and we hold them accountable. But we'll need your help to get the public on board." A difficult decision. At home, Marcus shared the findings with Camille and Jaden. Camille's face was pale with worry as she reviewed the documents. "Marcus, this is dangerous," she said. "They've already threatened you once. Now they're escalating." "I know," Marcus replied, his tone calm but resolute. "But this isn't just about me. It's about what kind of city we want to live in. If we back down now, we're letting fear win." Jaden looked at his father, his voice steady. "We're with you, Dad. Whatever it takes." Camille sighed, her eyes filling with tears. "Just promise me you'll be careful." Jack's crossroads. At the same time, Jack Daniels faced his own moment of truth. Paul Simmons had resurfaced, reaching out to Jack under the guise of reconciliation. Paul invited Jack to a secluded meeting, promising to set the record straight. Emily and Maggie were at home when Jack received the message. Emily noticed the tension in his face as he stared at his phone. "Jack, what's wrong?" she asked. "Paul wants to meet," Jack admitted. "He says he has something to tell me." Emily's brow furrowed. "And you're considering it?" Jack hesitated. "If he's involved in something bigger, I need to know. This could be my chance to expose whatever he's planning." Maggie's voice cut through the conversation, her tone urgent. "Dad, don't go. You don't owe him anything." Jack looked at his daughter, the pain in her eyes mirroring his own. "I have to do this, Maggie. If I can stop him, it's worth the risk." The confrontation. The meeting took place in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Jack arrived early, his senses on high alert. The air was thick with dust, and the faint sound of dripping water echoed through the cavernous space. Paul Simmons entered moments later, flanked by 2 other men Jack recognized as former officers. Paul's smirk was as smug as ever. "Jack," Paul greeted, spreading his arms. "Glad you could make it." "Cut the crap, Paul," Jack said, his voice firm. "What do you want?" Paul chuckled. "I want to remind you where you came from. You think working with Williams makes you some kind of hero. You're still one of us, whether you admit it or not." "I'm nothing like you," Jack snapped. "You're stuck in the past, clinging to your hate. I'm trying to fix what I broke." Paul's expression darkened. "You really think the world is going to change because you had a change of heart? You're a fool, Jack. And fools don't last long." Jack noticed one of Paul's men shifting uncomfortably, his hand moving toward his waistband. Jack raised his hand slowly. "Think carefully about your next move, Paul. You want to fight this out here, or do you want to walk away before it's too late?" The sound of sirens cut through the tense silence. Paul's face twisted in fury as Detective Clara Monroe and her team stormed the warehouse. Their weapons drawn. "Everyone freeze," Clara shouted. Paul and his men surrendered without a fight, and Jack stepped back, relief washing over him as Clara approached. "Nice timing," Jack muttered. Clara smirked. "We've been tracking them for weeks. You just gave us the final piece we needed." A community united. With Paul Simmons and his associates in custody, the immediate threat against Marcus and his family subsided, but the fight for justice and reform continued. Marcus and Jack worked together to rebuild trust, leading initiatives that brought officers and community members together. One such initiative was a citywide listening tour, where residents could share their experiences with law enforcement. Jack attended every session, often sitting silently as people recounted painful stories of misconduct and abuse. Each testimony deepened his resolve to be part of the change. At the same time, Marcus used his platform to advocate for structural reforms, including independent oversight and comprehensive training programs. His efforts earned both praise and criticism, but he remained steadfast. A new beginning. Months later, Marcus and Jack found themselves standing side by side at the grand opening of a new community center. The facility, named after a local activist who had fought for justice, symbolized the progress they had made and the work that still lay ahead. As Marcus addressed the crowd, his voice was filled with conviction. This center is more than a building. It's a commitment, a promise to continue the work of bridging divides and building a more just society. Change isn't easy, but it's necessary. And together, we can make it happen. Jack spoke next, his tone humble. I'm not here as a hero or a savior. I'm here as someone who made mistakes and is working to make amends. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that we're stronger when we listen to each other and when we're willing to grow. The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers a testament to the progress that had been made. A better future. As the sun set that evening, Marcus and Jack stood outside the center, watching as families and children filled the space with laughter and life. Think we've done enough? Jack asked, a faint smile playing on his lips. Marcus shook his head. Not even close. But it's a start. For the first time in years, both men felt a sense of peace. They had faced their demons, owned their mistakes, and found a way to move forward, not just for themselves, but for the community they had vowed to serve. The road to redemption was long, but they had proven that even the deepest divides could be bridged with courage, accountability, and a shared commitment to justice.